Is this intentional? Like, is the goal of the government to make it easier for corporations to function with very low wages?
If you aren't willing to pay the median wage at an absolute minimum, sorry, you shouldn't be able to bring people in. I think that entire stream should be abolished. I'm truly of the belief that if you are good enough to work here, you're good enough to stay here, and you're good enough to live here.
Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Cara Stern,
And I'm Mike Moffatt.
and today we're discussing how Canada increased the number of low-wage temporary foreign workers from less than 30,000 to over 78,000 in the span of a single year, and the impact that this might be having on the job market.
But before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
A recent article by the Globe and Mail's Matt Lundy found that the number of temporary foreign workers in the government's low-wage stream more than doubled in 2022. And so this raises a lot of questions, but let's start at the beginning. What are temporary foreign workers, and what does it mean for them to be in the low-wage stream?
Yeah, so temporary foreign worker is just an international worker who is here on a time limited visa that is coupled with a particular employer. The most famous example, the well known one, is the agriculture stream. So you have somebody from overseas, Jamaica or wherever, who gets hired to work on a farm for 4 months, looking after the tomato plants or whatever. But there are a few other streams. One is the high wage stream for higher income workers, and there's a lower wage stream for basically lower income workers. Now, how high and low wage is measured is relative to the province's median wage. So we have one stream in Ontario for workers that make over $27 an hour. And this low wage stream, where we've seen the big increases, is for workers making less than $27 an hour. And these permits are tied to a particular company, right? So if you get hired as a temporary foreign worker to work for a fast food company, you're kind of tied to that company. And we've seen a massive increase in this low wage stream. That's people who are brought in for these non-agricultural jobs earning less than $27 an hour. A lot of these are in fast food. So this is chefs, cashiers, etc. And I have to admit, I was late to the game on this one. I remember you and I talking about this on Slack, and you were bringing this to my attention. And I thought, well, yeah, I mean, this has always gone on, but it can't, the numbers haven't gone up that much, have they? And turns out I was wrong. You were right. We have seen a big explosion in this low wage stream. So I got to ask you, what were you seeing that made you sit up and notice this?
I think it was two things, which is I heard a lot about people talking on like different social media websites about how difficult it's been for them to get a job, particularly people in their 20s. And so there was a lot of people talking about that, people writing into us talking about the challenges. And then when we had the immigration minister, Mark Miller, on, I started looking through the actual data of who's actually been approved based on the labor market impact assessments. And I was so surprised by how many companies had temporary foreign workers. You look at the kind of jobs where people are coming in, and I realized how expansive it was in places that to me make no sense. Like, I understand the whole idea of, if you're in a Tim Hortons somewhere in the middle of nowhere, that sometimes they bring people in, fine, I can see that. But when I think it was a McDonald's in Toronto, like near a subway line, I was like, this makes no sense at all.
Yeah, and one of our viewers sent us a website that actually maps where people are getting accepted, or the businesses that are getting accepted to bring in temporary foreign workers. And we can put that in the show notes, a link to that. But it's absolutely wild. I was looking, the Dairy Queen near Fanshawe College in London, Ontario, got accepted by the federal government to bring in a temporary foreign worker. And to my mind, that's just wild. Like, if you can't find somebody in London, Ontario, to work at a Dairy Queen, which is surrounded by college students, you can't find somebody to work there. That just doesn't make sense to me, and I don't think it makes sense to too many people.
So what actually made the government decide to increase it? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, so this exploded in 2022. Now, if you recall, like unemployment rate was unusually low after the pandemic when things opened up again. The unemployment rate got low. Wages were actually starting to increase a little bit, and this always, panics workplaces. And inflation was up, so the government decided to make a number of changes. These are listed in Matt Lundy's article again, so we would recommend you check that out. But couple things that the government did. That first, it allowed 20% of the workforce at a particular business could now be temporary foreign workers. The old rule was 10%. There used to be a rule that if the local unemployment rate was under 6%, you were allowed to have temporary foreign workers. But if it was above that, if the unemployment rate was high in an area, you couldn't use the low wage stream. They got rid of that rule as well. So they basically just weakened all of the rules around when you could bring in a temporary foreign worker. And not surprisingly, it allowed companies to bring in more temporary foreign workers. Now, I know how this sits with me, sort of as I could give a cold clinical economist, two-handed answer going, on the one hand, this is good, but on the other hand, this is bad. But again, I got to ask you, as somebody who isn't an economist, how does this all sit with you?
It's terrible. It makes me wonder whether the government is kind of intentionally trying to suppress wages. I don't know that that's something that they're actually thinking about, but that's the effect. And you have to think that, like, a lot of people are looking at this and just thinking, well, if you have this many people coming in for this many jobs, then chances are they wages can never go up. And you see people trying to get these low wage jobs when you look at all these articles about like job fairs of people lining up, and
Mhm.
it's like thousands of people lining up for a very small number of jobs. It just feels like, is this intentional? Like, is the goal of the government to make it easier for corporations to function with very low wages? And I always hear about how brutal kitchens are as a workspace, and you often hear about people doing it as like a labor of love, and that's why they can get away with such toxic behavior in a lot of these workspaces. And I think that it's not that highly paid, and it's never going to be if every time you're like, hey, this person's demanding more money, we'll just bring someone in from another country and let that person take that job. And it just feels absolutely terrible. I don't know if there's any malicious intent here, or if it's just trying to make Canada a better place for corporations. Do you have any idea?
Well, yeah. So the government claims, and this is not just this federal government. This goes back both liberal and conservatives. That the idea here is not to suppress wages, is to deal with labor market
But
shortages.
labor market
Uh,
shortages is how wages go up.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So they're like, we're not trying to deal with, we're not trying to suppress wages. We're trying to deal with labor market shortages. But you're absolutely right. There's another way to deal with labor market shortages, and it's to allow wages to go up to the point at which companies sort of figure out alternatives. They either, hire other folks, maybe they automate, or they just figure out ways of doing without. So yeah, the intent here is not, or again, the claimed intent here is not to drive down wages, but we've kind of legislated out one of the ways that we allow wages to increase, again, particularly for the lower end workers, particularly for the workers at that Dairy Queen next to Fanshawe College.
I know a lot of people talking about this online seem to think, and I think they're mistaken when they think about how little money these workers are being paid. I think there's a lot of people who think they're being paid less than minimum wage, and I know that's not the case. But that makes me wonder what the incentive is for the company to hire temporary foreign workers instead of someone local. Like, they're not necessarily saving money. So then I would have to think the incentive must be something along the lines of, like, if you're tied to this company, you can't complain. If you're not happy with
Mhm.
the your working conditions, you can't leave and go to another company if your visa's tied you to that one company. You may not know your rights the same way as someone who is living here and knows that they have options. Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, I think that that is part of it. Now they have to basically show that they can't find anybody at the prevailing wage, right? That's sort of the rule here. And yeah, I think in most cases that that's probably the case that, if the job has historically paid, I don't know, $18 an hour, uh, and they look around and nobody wants it at $18 an hour, then, they're able to bring someone in. But as we pointed out, the alternative is to allow the wage for that job to go to 19 or $20 an hour. So it's not so much that they're trying to get labor for cheaper, but rather that they're trying to find ways not to have the wages, not to have to offer higher wages for this position.
But you see all the time in the news these stories about job fairs where people are looking just for minimum wage jobs that have really long lines to go work there. Like how and I hear from a lot of people online about how they're applying for jobs. You see this on like on Reddit a lot. You'll often hear
Mhm.
people coming in and
Yeah.
complaining, I've been applying to hundreds of jobs. I just don't even hear back. This place has had a hiring sign for ages. I've submitted my resume. They don't even get back to me. So I wonder how much evidence they have to give the government that they're actually trying to hire people.
Yeah, so I mean, there is some, but there are kind of ways around that, right? That you have to publicly post these jobs, right? But there are, and there's kind of a list of places where you have to show you had to make a good faith effort, but some of those are not searched all that well, right? So you could go, well, I put a job posting on XYZ job hunt website that nobody goes to. And the second thing is you could put criteria on there, right? You could go, well, you have to have at least 5 years of experience, using the ice cream-o-matic 3000, right? And they can go, yeah, sure, we got 350 applications, but nobody had 5 years of experience using this machine, even though you might be able to train somebody to do that in 20 minutes. So so they don't have to show that nobody applied or anything like that, which makes sense. They just have to show that nobody was qualified. But that that's a restriction that you could drive a truck through, right? When you can start to put in all kinds of necessary qualifications on the job ad, and then go, well, yeah, look, we had all these applications, but nobody had that 5 years experience, so we're going to bring in a temporary foreign worker.
One thing I wonder about is that impact that this has on productivity, because you hear all the time about how Canada has a productivity issue. And if firms have endless supply of inexpensive labor, it doesn't make sense that they'd ever try to automate, because they can just get someone for cheaply. It might be cheaper than actually building something that might actually make us more productive. Do you think that this is actually having ramifications on our productivity levels?
I do, with the caveat that there's not a lot of great Canadian studies on this. But what there are studies around, tight labor markets. What are the impacts of tight labor markets? Low unemployment, because that's essentially what the temporary foreign worker program does, is kind of prevent there from being tight labor markets, prevent there from being low unemployment. So we can actually look at the experience in tight labor market and go, okay, what happens in those tight labor markets? There was a recent study that came out from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. They issued a report called "Does Worker Scarcity Spur Investment, Automation, and Productivity? Evidence from Earnings Calls." So earnings calls are, a Fortune 500 company says, okay, we made such and such money this year, and here's why. So here was the conclusion from the piece. I don't think I could do justice summarizing it, so I'm just going to read it word for word. Our novel, firm level measures of labor issues and automation, combined with data from publicly traded companies, suggest that a historically tight labor market has prompted firms to adopt automation technologies to address labor shortages. This effect appears to be particularly strong in industries with high shares of routine manual tasks. First, we found that labor issues lead to large increases in investment. Similarly, firms that mention labor issues in their earnings calls are also more likely to mention automation. Finally, labor issues result in productivity gains for some firms as they increase their investment in automation and adopt new innovation. And I absolutely believe that it's likely that Canada's use of temporary foreign workers to address tight labor markets is likely harming our productivity. maybe Dairy Queen would invest in better, ice cream making machines so they don't need to have as many people in the Fanshawe locations. I think we need to study this to make sure, but yeah, I'm convinced. It doesn't explain all of our productivity challenges. I think it has dozens of reasons, but I do think this is a part of what's going on.
If you could get the government to actually make this a functional system that works for Canadians, what would that actually look like?
Well, so I'd actually like to hear your ideas first. If we make you in charge of this program for a day, how would you reform it?
I would seriously limit where they're allowed to actually hire people. I think that there's a lot of positions that, like, I don't know how many of restaurants and fast foods places need temporary foreign workers to operate. I keep thinking like they should be able to operate based on just actually hiring people. And I understand a lot of these places have tight margins, not all of them. I know a lot of restaurants do. I don't know that about fast food places. But I would say that like a lot of these jobs, like if you can't find people, offer a higher wage, and that's just part of doing business. And I love an idea that I know that you've advocated for on this
Hmm.
podcast, where you've talked about maybe they need to offer something like 3 times minimum wage before they actually are allowed to hire someone. Like if you can, if you can't find a Canadian to do it for, $45 an hour or $50 an hour, sure, hire someone for that wage. I understand that there's some jobs that are ones that a lot of Canadians don't do. But most jobs, I think there's a wage where someone's willing to do that job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have to go through this kind of stream by stream by stream. Um, my view, the low wage stream should end. Like just period. If you aren't willing to pay the median wage at an absolute minimum, sorry, you shouldn't be able to bring people in. I think that entire stream should be abolished. I'd give time for that. I wouldn't do that overnight. Firms have plans, that kind of thing. But say, okay, 2 years, 3 years, we can debate what that number is, but that stream just should go away. The agriculture one, I would like to see. I don't think you can get rid of that one. I think that one is a little bit more challenging. But if I think there should be ways to ratchet that down a little bit. Maybe increase the minimum wage on that to try and encourage folks in Canada. Some will be Canadians. Many of them might be international students or non-Canadians already living here. They need work too. So, might encourage some of them to go work in agriculture. And I think that would be a fantastic thing. And on the higher wage one, yeah, I think I would like to see those wages go up. And I do think there is a use for them, right? Like if you've got, let's say, if like Bruce nuclear power plant needs some repairs, and there's some specialist in Germany or whatever that can help out. Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of thing should be allowed. But that's my big one. I truly believe the low wage temporary foreign worker stream is exploitive, and it should end as soon as humanly possible.
Going back to that agriculture stream, I wonder whether if we do need it, can we do it in a way where people have a little more flexibility, but where they're working, where they can jump between employers? I don't know whether they can right now. I know that there's been a push to be able to do that a little bit, and a lot of agriculture companies have been fighting against that. There's a really great podcast from the Canada Land Commons. They did a series on work, and they did a couple episodes about agriculture workers, and particularly people coming in from other countries to work in agriculture. And you hear some of the working conditions, and it's brutal. It's worth listening to, and it's something that I think that if they were allowed to kind of move into something else, if they come here and realize, their employer is not a good employer, make it easy for people to jump around, I think that would improve the system a lot too.
Yeah, I do as well. So I do think there are reforms here, particularly in the ag one, and I think there should also be a pathway to permanent residency for all this. Like, I'm truly of the belief that if you are good enough to work here, you're good enough to stay here, and you're good enough to live here. So love to see some kind of program where if you've been a temporary foreign worker for 5 summers or something like that, and you want permanent residency, you should be able to get it. And again, in the ag stream, in particular. So we'd have to figure out what those details are. But I certainly do think they need more rights and a pathway to permanent residency if they so choose to take it.
Thanks so much for watching and listening, and thanks as always to our producer, Meredith Martin.
And if you want to tell us your story about the labor market and looking for a lower wage job, please send us an email at missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next time.